An unusual friendship, a giant striped predator, and a scrappy little wildcat who showed up out of nowhere. It sounds like something out of a storybook, but this actually happened at a wildlife rescue center, and by the time it was over, nobody on staff had dry eyes. Let's start from the beginning, because the ending only makes sense once you know how broken this animal was when he first arrived. He came to the sanctuary in rough shape. Confiscated from poachers who'd kept him in a cramped cage for years, he arrived skeletal, flinching at every sound, terrified of open space after being denied it for so long. The caretakers expected the usual adjustment period, a few nervous weeks, then slowly, a tiger reclaiming his instincts. That's not what happened. Months went by and he never came out of his shell. He wouldn't touch most of his food. He never played with the enrichment toys the keepers left in his enclosure. He didn't roar, didn't chuff, didn't make any of the sounds tigers use to communicate. Instead, he wore a groove into the dirt along the enclosure fence, walking the same track for hours, staring at nothing. The vet team ran tests. Physically, he was recovering. Psychologically, he seemed to have simply switched off. The head keeper later said it was like watching an animal that had forgotten what being a tiger even meant. Then, one ordinary evening, something changed. A small wildcat, barely bigger than a house cat with the sharp, alert eyes of something used to fending for itself, slipped out of the tree line bordering the sanctuary and sat down near the tiger's fence. Just sat there, watching. The staff assumed she'd wander off by morning. She didn't. The following night, she was back in the exact same spot, and the night after that. By the fourth or fifth visit, something in the tiger had shifted. He stopped pacing his usual loop and started drifting toward that corner of the fence instead, lying down where she always appeared, as though he were saving her a seat. Night vision cameras picked up hours of footage, two very different animals, sitting a few inches apart, separated by chain link, doing nothing but existing near each other. Then one night, the little cat reached a paw through the fence. The tiger slowly, almost cautiously, lifted his own paw and pressed it near hers. It was the first sign of life anyone had seen from him in months. Here's where the story could have gone wrong. However sweet the moment looked on camera, the size difference was alarming. A full-grown tiger, even a gentle one, can seriously injure a small animal without any bad intention at all. A swat meant playfully could be lethal. The sanctuary staff couldn't take that risk, so they made the call to relocate the tiger to a different section of the property, further from the fence line, for everyone's safety. The wildcat kept coming back to the old enclosure anyway. Night after night, she'd appear at that same spot and find it empty. Meanwhile, in his new habitat, the tiger unraveled completely. He refused food entirely this time. He wouldn't move from one spot, facing the wall, uninterested in the keepers, uninterested in anything. After 3 days of this, the team realized they'd made a mistake. Not in trying to protect the cat, but in underestimating how much that fragile connection meant to him. She wasn't just an interesting visitor, she was the only thing that had reached him since he'd arrived. So the staff got creative. They built a small transitional space, a secure buffer pen attached to the tiger's enclosure that the wildcat could enter and exit freely, but that kept a controlled barrier in place for safety. The first time she padded through that gate, the tiger didn't hesitate. He rose, really rose, fully alert, ears forward, and crossed the enclosure to meet her with a softness nobody expected from an animal his size. She rubbed her head along his jaw. He dipped his massive head down to hers. Whatever wall he'd built around himself for the past year cracked wide open in that instant. From that day forward, they were rarely apart. She slept curled between his front paws. She groomed his cheeks like he was one of her own kind. She trotted along beside him with the total confidence of a creature 20 times her size, completely unbothered by the difference. He in turn shared his food with her, played with a gentleness that surprised even the vets, and let her scramble across his back and shoulders as if he were furniture built specifically for her amusement. Visitors started asking about them by name. Staff filmed their routines constantly. The unlikely pair became the most talked about residents at the sanctuary, a massive rescued tiger and a tiny wild visitor who seemed to have appointed herself his personal therapist. Months into this new normal, disaster struck without warning. The wildcat simply stopped showing up. One day passed with no sign of her, then 2, then 3. The tiger's behavior spiraled fast, pacing again, letting out low, anxious rumbling sounds nobody had heard from him before, pressing his nose to the ground along her usual path as if trying to track her scent. He stopped eating again, and the old, hollow version of him started creeping back to the surface. Just before dawn on the fourth day, a keeper doing rounds spotted her collapsed near a footpath, dehydrated, weak, barely responsive. The team rushed her to the on-site clinic immediately. What happened next is the part the staff still talk about. The tiger planted himself against the wall of his enclosure closest to the clinic building and would not leave that spot. He stayed there, nose against the bars, for hours, clearly listening for any sound from inside. When the medical team moved her to a heated recovery crate deeper in the building, he tracked every movement from his side of the fence, pacing anxiously whenever she whimpered, going still and quiet whenever her breathing evened out. She stayed under observation for several days. He never left that corner, not once. When she was finally strong enough, they opened the connecting gate again. She walked in slowly, still a little unsteady, and the tiger let out a low, rolling chuff, a sound tigers reserve almost exclusively for family. She crossed straight to him, rubbed along his cheek, and folded herself against his chest. The cameras caught every second of it, and by the staff's own account, there wasn't a dry eye in the building when they reviewed the footage. You'd think that would be the end of it. It wasn't. A few weeks later, she vanished again, but this time the tiger's reaction was different. No panic, no refusing food, just a quiet, focused alertness, as if some instinct told him this disappearance meant something else entirely. Sure enough, one morning, she reappeared at the fence with two tiny kittens trailing unsteadily behind her. The tiger froze completely. So did the watching staff. Nobody was sure what would happen next. Then the wildcat walked her kittens straight up to the barrier, and one of them squeezed underneath the gate before anyone could react. The tiger lowered his entire body flat to the ground, brought his nose down slowly, and touched it gently to the kitten's head. The kitten let out a tiny squeak. The tiger answered with another soft chuff. Just like that, the family had two new members. The sanctuary quickly built out a secure, permanent habitat where the wildcat could bring her kittens through anytime she chose. The kittens turned the tiger into their personal playground almost immediately. Climbing over his tail, batting at his whiskers, curling up to sleep in the curve of his massive paws while their mother watched proudly nearby, resting beside the one animal on the property capable of crushing them by accident and choosing, every single time, not to. None of it should have worked on paper. A traumatized tiger recovering from years of confinement. A wild, self-sufficient cat with no reason to trust anything behind a fence. Two kittens who had no way of knowing how much danger they were technically in. But it worked anyway, because sometimes the connections that save us aren't the ones anybody plans. They're the ones that show up quietly, night after night, and simply refuse to leave. If you've stuck around this long, here's the reward. Several minutes of pure, unscripted footage of this tiger and his adopted family just being ridiculous together. Climbing, wrestling, and napping in a pile like the world's most mismatched litter.